Our next question is from Rhiannon Down.
Rhiannon Down from The Australian, thank you for your speech. You've said a no vote at the referendum will mean governments will take greater accountability on outcomes for Indigenous people. But how do you create this accountability under the existing structures? How is this different to what is being tried now? And can I confirm, do you support a second referendum? Will you campaign for it as the Indigenous spokeswoman?
Thank you. So, to your first question, we have all the mechanisms in place to apply accountability. Prime Minister Albanese is not applying those mechanisms. It's why myself and Senator Karen Little have asked the Senate to support our motion to hold an inquiry into Land Councils, statutory authorities, native title, Aboriginal organisations who are funded to represent the views of Aboriginal Australians. I want to acknowledge Levinas, who's in the audience, who was quite upset at the beginning of this press club. I know why she's upset, because she has fought all her life to be heard by representatives of these organisations and has been ignored and disrespected as a traditional owner in her own right. And that is what myself and my colleague Karen Little want. We want to apply accountability to these organisations who are responsible for the lives of our most marginalised, and we have all the mechanisms to do that within our democratically elected structure that currently exists. And it is an absolute lie to suggest that we can't use what we have already to do that.
Next question is from Tom McElroy.
And on your referendum question, you know, obviously, again, it comes down to the processes that we'd need to follow in the first place. If Australians are happy to do that, and that is what we find within the processes, then that is what I would support.
Do you think that second referendum could be done in the first term of a coalition government?
I can't answer that question at this stage, and I'm far more concerned with knocking over this referendum before anything else.
Next question is from Tom McElroy.
Thanks for taking our question, Senator. Tom McElroy from the Financial Review. You said that the voice risks undermining the authority of MPs and Parliament, including the many Indigenous MPs who are present and who you listed. Wouldn't local and regional voices present the same phantom risk to state parliaments, to local governments where you've served, to the national parliament? What's the rationale for local and regional voices if a national voice undermines the fundamental right of parliament?
Well, we're talking about constitutionally enshrining an unknown entity at this stage that we know that activists have suggested would be weaponised to punish parliamentarians such as myself. So that is that objective is there for those that want to occupy positions of power on this voice. Now, what we want to do as a coalition is amplify people in regional and remote communities. You know what, I probably wouldn't even use the word voice, but that's what we would seek to do. It's what I've been actively doing. It's why I've got you know, unknown members of our community in the room with me today who have been trying to be heard by those in power who are not being heard. And I would suggest that we in fact need ears in Canberra, not a voice, and we need to be listening to the regions. That's what we need to be doing, because that's where the most marginalised exist.
The next question is from Anna Henderson.
Thank you, Senator. You have criticised the voice because of the division you say it would create and the idea of preferential treatment for one group. At the same time, you've accepted the Shadow Indigenous Australians portfolio. So what is your key policy for Indigenous Australians? And should the portfolio and the Shadow portfolio exist?
That's a really good question, because I think I've said publicly that ultimately and the voices are contradictory in itself, because it's supposed to be about closing the gap, but if you constitutionally enshrine it, that's suggesting the gap will exist in perpetuity, and that is not what we want. The same can be said for the portfolio that I hold. I would hope to see that one day in our country we wouldn't require such a portfolio, because if we don't have that portfolio, it means that everybody is taking advantage of the same opportunities that our country has to offer. So
why should it exist now under that thinking if you don't want to see a separation between the two?
Why should it exist now? Because, well, it does exist. It already exists. It's what I've been given the responsibility to be part of. And I think it is incumbent upon me, certainly me and my colleagues, which is what we're doing, is to use such a position, because let's not forget, it is a position of power to hold to account those that we are responsible for within this portfolio. So there are over 3,000 Aboriginal organisations, and many of whom the responsibility of this portfolio go under. So therefore, if you are responsible for such a portfolio, you should be holding to account those under you that are supposed to be delivering the outcomes, because government might hold the purse strings, but it's everybody's responsibility going forward. And that's the accountability that I don't believe has been applied effectively enough previously.
Our next